Okay, I think we're going to get started this morning. I know a few people are still joining. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to what is our 13th session in NHS Providers series of virtual events on provider collaboration. This is part of a programme of work that we're running to ensure that we can respond to the challenges, changes that our members are facing at the moment. And this programme focuses on sharing good practice and peer learning on a range of hot topics to do with provider collaboration. And it's all through events like today's one. So in the context of national policy developments on provider collaboration, we're keen not to lose sight of the full range of forms that collaboratives are taking. So the focus of our programme is on how we can share learning across all provider types. If you've been unable to attend any of our previous events on collaboration, you can view full recordings of the webinars. You can read our case study briefing documents as well, which are all based on those webinars, and we'll make sure that we include links to those in the email that comes round after today's event. Please do feel free to use the chat function in Zoom and throughout the session to share your suggestions and ideas for any topics linked to provider collaboration that you'd like to see covered in our future events, and we can make sure we take down a note of those. In today's event, we're going to explore how collaborative working at scale can help providers tackle pressing workforce challenges through joint initiatives to improve staff recruitment and retention, which we know is, of course, a really pressing need and hot topic in the NHS at the moment. So we're going to hear from two case studies this morning from different types of sectors. So firstly, we're going to hear from David Williams, Kelvin Cheatle and Linda Dyson from the South West London Acute Provider Collaborative. And then we'll have a Q&A with that team. And then we're going to hear from Linda Garnett from the People Services Collaborative at Joined Up Derbyshire. And again, hopefully Linda's happy to take some Q&A as well at the end. So before we go into the first case study, there's just a few bits of housekeeping that I'll run through. The session is, as you might have clocked already, the session is being recorded. So it'd be really helpful if you could have your microphones muted while others are speaking, just to avoid interference on the recording. As I said before, comments, questions can be posted in the chat box throughout, but we will have a dedicated time for Q&A, and we can do the raise a hand and wave at me at that point as well, if you prefer not to use the chat function. I think that's everything that we've got to run through before we kick off. So I'm going to hand straight over to David, Kelvin and Linda for their presentation, please.
Thank you, Isabel. Nice to see you, everybody. My name is David Williams. I'm Managing Director for the South West London Acute Provider Collaborative. So I'm just going to give you a quick couple of slides in terms of context with who we are and where we are. And then I'll hand over to Kelvin and Linda. So here we go. This is us, South West London. We are a collaborative of 4 acute trusts, St George's University Hospital Foundation Trust, who are in a group model with Epsom and St Helier, so 2 hospital sites there in Epsom and St Helier, and we're part of the 40 new builds as well. So a new build at Sutton is part of that 40 hospital programme, and 2 additional trusts at Croydon and Kingston. And we work very closely with the Royal Marsden, who are our cancer partners in terms of delivering cancer services across the patch as well. So 6 boroughs there in southwest London. So next slide, please. So this just gives you a context with what our key priorities are. So actually the collaborative has been in place since 2017. So it's been long in its gestation and its legacy. The 2 key areas are, like many acute provider collaboratives, we're focused on diagnostic, outpatient and elective recovery, which we work as a system together in terms of mutual aid, capital investment, etc. So those are our core programs of recovery, and they're supported by 16. We've got 16 clinical networks that support transformation with clinicians across GPs and secondary care working on transformation schemes and pathways in individual specialties. But what's significant about us is we also have 4 distinct provider collaboratives which are hosted by a particular provider, and that's Recruitment Hub, Procurement, Pathology, and Swellyock. So Swellyock is our orthopaedic centre at Epsom Hospital. So that undertakes all of the elective orthopaedic surgery for all of the trusts in the patch. So it's a really interesting model, and I'm happy to share that model with colleagues if that's helpful. So that's us. Those are our core programs of work as a collaborative. And I'm going to hand over to Kelvin and Linda, who are going to take you through the Recruitment Hub and how it's developed. Kelvin.
Thank you very much, David. Good morning, everybody. I'm Kelvin Cheatle. I'm the Chief People Officer for Kingston Hospital and Hounslow Richmond Community Trust. And I've got my colleague Linda Dyson here with me. We're sharing a camera, so there's a quick hello from Linda, so you can see Linda.
Hello, everybody. I'm Linda Dyson. I am the Deputy Chief People Officer at Kingston and Hounslow Richmond, and I am the lead for the South West London. Morning.
So you'll gather from that Linda's the one that does most of the work, but I'm just going to lead the presentation here, and Linda will help me with any questions. So as David told you, one of the early implementers, I guess, around corporate services, in fact, the lead implementation project was the Recruitment Hub. We started having discussions around the concept probably about 4 years ago. It came to fruition 2 years ago, and we launched in the middle of COVID, which you may say was bold or stupid, but actually, from our point of view, we felt that it was the right time to get this project off the ground. And the concept behind the Recruitment Hub, quite simply, is bringing together the recruitment needs of all the acute trusts in South West London, and more recently, we've added in Hounslow and Richmond, the community trust. I can see some.
Kelvin, sorry to interrupt, Kelvin.
Yeah.
I think colleagues are struggling to hear a little bit, so I don't know whether you're close to the mic or whether you could raise your voice. I think that would help colleagues. Sorry.
Yeah. Let me just see if we can turn up a bit here. Bear with us. Is that any better?
Yeah, that does sound better.
Lovely. Okay, let me just back up then very briefly. So, following David's introduction, the Recruitment Hub was the early implementer for corporate services. Are people hearing me now?
We're struggling a bit, Kelvin, to be frank.
How is that? Is that any better?
That's much, much better. Loud and clear.
Excellent. The joys of technology. Apologies, colleagues. So let me start again. As David has told you, the Recruitment Hub was the early implementer around our corporate service collaboration. We first had the idea of creating a Recruitment Hub as a one-stop shop for all the recruitment needs of trusts in South West London around 4 years ago. But we decided to implement 2 years ago when we were knee-deep in COVID. You may say, based on what you hear this morning, that was either brave or foolish. We'll let you judge. Could we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So the Hub is a shared service. It's hosted by Kingston Hospital, but for reasons that we won't go into here, is actually based in Epsom, which I guess reflects the flexibility of the arrangements we've got in South West London. And when we set the project up, it was on the basis that we would need to create a service that met the needs of every constituent organisation. Kingston's actually one of the smaller trusts in South West London. George's are much bigger, but we needed to provide a service that will meet everybody's needs. So the concept was shared ownership, very clear service levels and demands, but everyone working in the spirit of a collaborative to create this new service. So phase one I've called the integration phase, which probably ran from the launch date for around 6 to 9 months. And of course, we firstly had to tune in the staff to the lead employer, Kingston. Sounds straightforward, but when you're doing that whilst you are running the service, it's very complex. And Linda, my colleague here, took the lead on that. So we physically transferred in 42 staff from all the recruitment services across the 4 trusts onto the Kingston books, because you need that control and cohesion to make these projects work. We learned fairly early on that you would think, wouldn't you, that recruitment is a fairly homogenous activity in the NHS. Well, I can tell you it isn't, because everyone does it slightly differently. Everyone has different protocols, different authorizations, different managers, and establishing those client roles and priorities made us realize very early on we were managing initially 4 quite different services. And one of our challenges was how we could bring those services together into a common core. Do it the same way, but meet individual needs and cultures, because recruitment essentially reflects the cultures of different organizations. So the starting point, I've lost my slides. Would you mind very much going back to the slides? Don't worry, I'll go to the hard copy. So we firstly established that what we needed was to agree some common KPIs, and those KPIs would be particularly based around what we call time to hire. I know some colleagues on the call will use that metric. That describes the lead time from the instruction to advertise through all the recruitment processes until the individual lands in post. And indeed, it's become the key metric that the activity is focused on. And we had a target, a very ambitious target. Oh, thank you. There's slide. We had a very ambitious target that we wanted to get down to 45 days from beginning of process to unconditional offer. Bearing in mind, some of the clients came in with time to hires of 80, 90, even 100 days. It was a very ambitious target. I'm very proud to say today, we're averaging 46 days across all the trusts. So we are very near a target. So once we set the service up, agreed what we wanted to do and how we wanted to organise ourselves to meet these, as it was then, 4 trust needs, the key was to get the client buy-in. And I think I'd be lying to say it was smooth. We realised quite early on that some clients, I think it's fair to say, thought the opportunity of creating a shared service was an excuse really to solve all their problems. And a shared service can never solve all the problems. It can level up, it can coordinate, but it cannot overnight transform performance. So I think the following 6 months from the setup phase was really about trying to establish that dialogue with clients about how we could improve performance, but how they needed to look at their own internal processes to make sure that the hub could deliver for them. So it's not a universal panacea. And we also needed to perhaps change a bit of the mindset that we were not recruiting for Kingston or Epsom or St George's or Croydon, but we were identifying with South West London as a collective employer. And that's quite a difficult thing. Most of us identify with our local trusts, the sites we work on. It's even more parochial than that. Some people identify with their team. So creating a South West London hub has become part of our mantra. And indeed, we have a website and we have branding that is recruiting for South West London, but with the individual trust identities within that. And we have sought further investment during these first 2 years to right-size the function. Of course, by bringing 4 functions together, it didn't mean we had the right cohort of staff on the right bands in the right organisation. So we have sought some further fairly modest investment to try and get that staffing right, although I'll come on to talk about where we're going with that next. And Linda particularly, if colleagues have questions, has spent a lot of time working with the individual clients to make sure they understand the service, they're happy with their KPIs, and how we can bespoke it to meet their various needs. So, for example, some trusts are further ahead with international recruitment than others. Some trusts want us to look after VSM appointments. Others are focused more on the kind of cohort approach around nurses and HCAs. And I guess post-pandemic, there's been a much bigger emphasis on local recruitment, getting people from schools or the unemployed people in our local economies into work. The hub is doing all of those things. Thank you. Next slide, please. And this brings us to where we are today, 2 years in. So we feel we've now got a hub we're very proud of. It's delivering. The HR directors, myself included, the CEOs are happy with it, but the challenge is where we go next. And where we go next, for those colleagues on the call who use Track, you will know Track is a pretty clunky thing. If you're trying to shortlist and review applications via Track, it's a fairly laborious, not user-friendly system. And we're in the process of agreeing a tender process that will replace Track. We're fairly determined that we want to look at a different kind of model. The focus is very much on the applicant experience and the manager need. And if you're an applicant on Track, you will know what I mean about it not being customer friendly. A lot of the activity we do on the lower bounded posts is fairly repetitive. It's not the most enriching, rewarding work, although it's very valuable. So we are now looking at robotics. Our colleagues at the Royal Free Hospital in London have already pioneered some work around this. And it does basically mean getting machines to do some of the basic sorting and sifting work. That frees up the hub and the staff to do much more in terms of added value. We're looking at streamlining the activity. So that really involves taking apart the recruitment process from deciding there's a vacancy, getting authorization, agreeing the finance, commissioning the advert, running the process, shortlisting and appointing, to try and streamline. For those colleagues on the call who recruit doctors, it's a very long-winded process. And we at the moment, although doctors aren't currently in the hub, we're looking at how we can break those steps down and streamline the approach. And NHSC have been leading on some work around recruitment streamlining. We got a brand new client. It's Hounslow and Richmond Community Trust, quite small. But I'm very pleased that we've been able to improve their time to hire by 50% in 3 months by giving them access to the hub and the bandwidth that can bring. And the next stage really is looking at whether we bring doctors and VSM recruitment into the hub on a global scale. We're in a discussion with colleagues about that. We think the model will work. But medical recruitment, as colleagues on the call will know, is more complex. We all spend a lot of money on search for VSMs. Can we provide that service within the hub and do it more effectively? And all of that will probably create the next stage in our development with a new service model. So my expectation is by the middle of this year, we would have embarked on our robotics. We'll be looking to replace Track or get Track working better. We will be looking at the scope of the service and remodeling and representing it. So it doesn't stand still. Next slide, please. So the lessons learned from this journey we've been on, I think are as follows. Firstly, this is not an outsourced service. And when things go wrong, as they always do in recruitment, there's always a glitch. The tendency is for some people to behave as though it's run by Capita or some external organisation. It isn't. It belongs to the South West London Trust, and we all have a share of responsibility. I think less so today, but in the early days, there was a bit of this feeling. And so we've had to work quite hard culturally at getting colleagues to realise it's a shared service we own. We haven't outsourced it to a private company. Linda may want to comment on this and any questions. Consistency of performance month in, month out is the key. It's quite laborious, but we need to make sure that we deliver the recruitment needs of all of the trusts. Our activity levels have grown by 60% in the last 2 years, reflecting how important recruitment is. Because we have this slightly strange arrangement where Kingston is the lead provider, but it's based in Epsom, we've had some estates and IT issues. And I think if we were starting again, we would probably be better prepared for those. You can't run a digital service without good IT. And the visibility of recruitment post-pandemic, I don't think anyone could have accounted for. So that growth in activity is absolutely phenomenal. And I'm sure colleagues in their own host organisations are experiencing that. Recruitment remains our #1 priority and activity that we're all pursuing. And I suppose finally, collaboration is hard work. You have to really work at it. You have to engage in it in an open spirit of learning. We, as the hosts, have to take criticism. Our partners have to take responsibility. But I do think in the 2 years we've been running the hub, we feel we've now reached a place where we've got maturity of relationships and understanding. And I hope we've got a hub that can be a model for running this kind of service going forward. So thank you very much for listening. They're the clear slides, and I think we're on to questions now, Isabel, is that correct?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Kelvin, David and Linda. It's really, really interesting presentation, and I'm sure lots of useful things in there that people can take away and would like to explore further in the Q&A. Please, colleagues, do add comments, questions into the chat or raise your hand and we can come to you for questions. I can't see any yet. Oh, we've got a question from Jo Debenham. Would you like to come in?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Jo Debenham, Associate Director of Engagement and Workforce in a provider collaborative, community provider collaborative in Mid and South Essex. Thank you for your presentation. I had two questions, actually. One was around, you talked a bit about your time to hire and the improvements that you'd made there. And I wondered if you had any other metrics that have evidenced the benefit of coming together in your shared platform. And then my other question, I'm not quite sure how to articulate this, is just to hear a bit more around the thinking behind TUPEing those 4 different recruitment teams together, compared to other options such as, you know, working collaboratively in inverted commas with things like honorary contracts for accessibility and stuff. And did you face any challenges when you made that decision to TUPE into one provider rather than an alternative option? It's something we struggle with, and we have obviously different partners who are sovereign organisations in their own right, and that kind of delicacy around, well, empire building, you know, and giving away parts of your empires and some of the challenges around that.
Jo, I feel you must have been in the room with us because you asked just the spot on questions. We're going to ask Linda to answer these because she's been at the top base. Linda.
So I think in terms of the TUPE question, I think the fact that as a collaborative, we have agreed collectively that there are a number of corporate services that we want to bring together in a shared model, and therefore the sense of who hosts it, we will share the services and the hosting across those organisations. So the sense that one organisation is trying to build their empire above others perhaps is mitigated by that very fact. And as David said earlier, it's quite a mature collaborative. So those trusting relationships are critical. And I think from a practical perspective, having all of those staff employed by one organisation does make it easier to bring a sense of team together. and we've got one overarching document that covers all the governance. So we've got a consortium agreement that is the legally binding document that describes the ownership, the funding arrangements, and also provides all the governance, for example, around IG. So I think it helped the team to belong to one organisation and to feel a sense of team, but it did help some of the governance. And we've just got one, as I said, one consortia agreement that describes all of that. So I would recommend that as a way forward. In terms of metrics, I think time to hire is, of course, the most critical one. The other metric that we look at really carefully is our vacancy rates. Now, there are other factors that impact on vacancy rates, clearly, that belong to the organisations, particularly more recently turnover. But we have been very successful, particularly in the last 18 months or so, to help stabilise those vacancy rates across the organisation. So as the whole of the NHS has experienced since we've started to come out of the pandemic, turnover rates have just absolutely shot up almost month on month. And that's been very challenging for us. But we have, because of the infrastructure that we have as a shared service, we have been able to absorb a lot of that recruitment activity that's fallen out of the fact that turnover rates have gone up with probably very little additional investment. And we can flex our resource very quickly to be able to sort of manage big scale campaigns in a way that it's difficult to have done if we remained in our legacy teams. So I think because we've been able to do that, we've been able to help stabilise vacancy rates, whereas perhaps those organisations would have really struggled to hold their vacancy rates down with such high turnover. So I think that's the other really key metric as a real flag about how we're doing in terms of our performance.
Does that help, Jo? Yeah.
Really helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Jay, for the questions. We've got a few hands up now, so I'll take Claire, Anna, and then Amma, and then we've got a couple of questions in the chat as well that I'll come to after that. So Claire, do you want to come in with yours?
Thanks, and thanks so much for the presentation. So Claire Thompson, I'm Director of Improvement and Partnerships at Great Western in Swindon. We're part of a Acute provider collaborative between Bath, Swindon and Wiltshire, Salisbury Trust, and looking at very similar things. I'm just interested to know if you needed to make and have delivered a financial case around the recruitment hub.
Yes, again, a very good question, Claire. Perhaps I'll start and get Linda to follow. So we presented the first phase, the integration phase, very much as cost neutral, because we were simply bringing 4 workforces together. But the whole business case was predicated on reducing turnover and improving vacancy rates and time to hire, which would then flow through into bank and agency usage. And I think that was the compelling thing that probably led the chief executives to support it. So we weren't looking to make savings in staff, but we were looking for their activity to produce efficiencies in our workforce. Yeah. And indeed, yesterday, David, a very interesting time to ask that question. David and I were with our HR director colleagues yesterday, weren't we, David? And we were having exactly the same discussion because we're on the threshold of introducing an occupational health hub, an investigation service, and other elements. And they're all predicated not on making savings in bringing the staff together, but in what they produce for the organisations. As David said to me yesterday, there is a limit of how many times we can say we're going to reduce bank and agency. You can only play that card once. But certainly the broader efficiencies are what we've marketed it on, Linda.
Yeah. And actually I would caution against looking for efficiency savings, because I think particularly when you start your shared service arrangements, actually you might even need a bit more investment, because there's a lot that, as Kelvin has described, that it is a significant task just to set up that new collaborative infrastructure and work towards streamlining all of those processes. So you almost need perhaps a bit of investment up front, but because if you do it properly at that early stage, then it will deliver significant benefits moving forward in the way that Kelvin's just described.
Brilliant, thank you, really helpful.
Thank you, Claire.
Thanks. I'll go to Anna Davidson now for your question.
Hi, thank you very much. Really interesting presentation. I'm Anna Davidson. I'm the chair at the James Paget University Hospitals over in the East Coast near Great Yarmouth, so out in the back of beyond, really.
Nice to meet you, Anna.
Nice to meet you too. We are in a collaborative with our fellow acutes in Norfolk, so with the Norfolk and Norwich and the Acute at King's Lynn, who's a district general hospital similar to ours. But if I can say in a polite way, we haven't perhaps moved things on in as much a way as we perhaps would have liked to. And part of that is around, I think, getting clear what the original aims are for the partnership, if you like, or for coming together. But my questions were two. One was, how have you sort of in an overarching manner, resourced this group activity? So you've obviously got lots of trusts together. Have you got a team that have been thinking through these projects and got them off the ground, or have you used existing staff and expected them to work alongside business as usual? So that's the first one, because we struggle a lot with, we have lots of good ideas, but finding the resource to do that within 3 trusts that are very busy with, as all are, with all their operational matters, has been difficult. And then the second question was around, if I may have to, you talked at one stage, I think David talked at one stage about the fact that you found that there were 4 or at least 4 different ways of doing the same thing, but it was possible to have one way, but delivered differently within each of the trusts in accordance to their own cultures. And I'm just interested to explore how you did that, and did it actually mean that you still had 4 processes that were the same, or did it actually mean that they ended up being 4 different processes? So just to really explore that a little bit more.
Again, Anna, I feel you must have been in the room with us yesterday, because I said, I'm going to ask David to pick up the first question, if I may, and Linda the second, if that's all right.
So I guess there's something about, Kelvin mentioned culture quite a lot in his presentation. There's a sense really in the trusts in South West London that we can only improve services if we work together. And especially through the pandemic, that's of course been really redolent. So there is a commitment from each of the trusts to invest in a central team for our collaborative efforts. So, I'm a permanent employee of the collaborative, hosted by Kingston, but I also have a team of senior managers managing the elective program, the diagnostic program, etc. And they work across the trusts to make sure we have consistency, standardization, and that we're managing sort of equality and health equalities between trusts, there's mutual aid, etc. So there is a sense that the organizations are investing in collaborative effort, and that takes both a culture plus some money behind it to make sure we're getting the best out of each of the individual trusts by working together.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Linda, do you want to deal with the, 4 clients for one system?
Yeah. And I'm not going to pretend this isn't challenging, but I think so. I think the bits that you can do collectively are around the efficiencies that you get from having one process. And I think you convince all of your clients of that by producing something that is of high quality, that's very efficient and that's very consistent. So you can convince them, if you like, that moving up rather than diluting standards, that you can deliver a service that is better. So, and I think that is the way of sort of convincing your clients that they need to move from where they were to something that's new and consistent. But within that, we still recognise that we've got 5 organisations who we support in our collaborative service. We recognise the uniqueness that each of those organisations brings. So when we're out in the market, in the job market, we are Sometimes we're out there as South West London, sometimes we're out there as our individual constituent organisations. And so I think it's a difficult balance, but you can achieve it. The most important thing is that your infrastructure, your process, your system is consistent, because that's helped you deliver quality and efficiency. But it doesn't mean that organisations need to lose their identity, their uniqueness, and what they can offer out in the job market.
Does that help, Anna?
Really helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Emma Safraz, could I come to you next, please?
Hi, I'm a consultant psychiatrist with a few management sort of responsibilities within Oxley's NHS Trust, which, as people might know, is based in sort of South London, Greater London sort of area, really.
We know you very well, Emma.
Okay. Well, I have a rather naive question. I'm just assuming that nursing and medical recruitment was a part of the project. And if that is the case, did you have any peculiar sort of challenges really regarding those two cohorts?
So at the moment, we manage all recruitment with the exception of doctor recruitment and senior manager BSM recruitment. And we made that decision, I suppose not eating the elephant is a good way of describing it. So we thought we'd start with our volume recruitment around all agenda for change. That includes our nursing colleagues. So we do all of that recruitment. As Kelvin spoke about earlier, we're now looking at whether we can extend the scope of the service to include our doctor colleagues and recruiting to our executive teams. So we are going through a process, obviously, of discussion and consultation with our partner organisations. I mean, in terms of nurse recruitment, I think that's probably one area where we've managed to make the most gains around doing it together rather than individually, because they're particularly because all of those organisations run big international campaigns. They run big cohort recruitment campaigns locally and nationally. So that was probably the area where we saw the most gains, and very quickly, because those colleagues work together across the system anyway. And so they're very keen to come together and do that and see the benefits of being out in the market of South West London.
Does that help, Emma?
Yeah, thank you.
We'll let you know when we've done the doctors. That's next.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm just going to flag a couple of the comments and questions in the chat, see if we have time for those, and then we can go back to hands raised if we've still got time. So there was a comment from John Lawler about the shared recruitment service they have in North Central London as well, and he wondered whether you're working together to learn any lessons from any teething problems.
So we're certainly working with partners in London. The Royal Free I talked about as an example, who've been leading implementers, and we're always open to new ideas. I think we kind of probably a bit selfishly like to think we're a bit of the head of the track because we've been doing this now for the longest. But we're always open to learning is the short answer to that question. And when we come on to talk about track and replacing that, we're talking to lots of people around the systems they're looking at the moment. So yes, it's the short answer.
Thank you, and thanks for picking up that one on track as well. I know there's a couple of people in the chat interested in that. I know there was one around, sorry, I've lost it now, around the KPI calculation, and keeping in mind most candidates will have notice periods of a minimum of 1 month or longer. So just how did you sort of make that match up?
Linda?
Yeah, so just to clarify, I mean, this was one of the challenges actually, because there is no time to hire measure that's consistent across the NHS. So, and we had 5 different ways of measuring time to hire across our 5 organisations. So we developed the KPI that we use at the moment. That concludes, that 45 days concludes at the point that we send an unconditional offer to our candidates. So we've done all the pre-employment checks and they've got their unconditional offer. It does not include the notice period. So it starts at the point that vacancy is approved by the client organisation. So at the point we're about to go out and advertise, and the 45 days concludes at the point that we've provided the unconditional offer. Very happy, if anybody's interested, very happy to share the detail of that metric.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to let you go because I know we're a minute over for your session. You've got another meeting to get to. So big thank you to Kelvin, Linda and David for the interesting detail you're able to share. I know there's still a few outstanding questions in the chat, so we'll take a note of those just in case we're able to follow up on those.
We'll gladly answer them, Isabel, and thank you everyone for having us this morning. It's been enjoyable. Thank you.
Much appreciated. Thank you. And now we're going to hear from Linda Garnett for our second case study. Over to you, Linda.
Thank you, Isabel, and good morning, everybody. My name is Linda Garnett. I'm the Programme Director for the People Services Collaborative in Derby and Derbyshire, ICS. If you could go on to the next slide, please. So this is just a brief introduction to Derby and Derbyshire. We're one of the smaller ICSs in England. Some of our features are we have 2 upper tier local authorities, a wide range of variation in healthy life expectancy. Like many other people, we have some significant financial challenges within the system, which we expect to become more challenging over the next couple of years. If you could move on to the next slide, thanks. So within our system, we have one provider collaborative, which includes all the NHS providers, both the acute providers, community, ambulance, and our out of hours and 111, plus our mental health provider. So that's the sort of the basis of our approach to provider collaboration. When we started to think about a people services collaborative, we decided that we would invite other partners as well to be part of the collaborative. So we also have the Voluntary Sector Alliance and our 2 councils, the county and the city council, plus general practice through the GP provider board. The extent to which they get involved differs across different programmes of work, but we decided to take that inclusive approach from the outset. If you could just move forward onto the next slide, thank you. So we set up our People Services Collaborative in May of last year, 2022, and really the drive behind it was about trying to improve our ability to work together. And we felt that the way to really get into that was to really focus on why would we want to collaborate on our people services activities. And these were the reasons that we collectively agreed it made sense for us to work together. And it was really about focusing on what are the things that are important to all of us. And it kind of coincided with obviously the establishment of the ICB and some focus around the 10 outcome-based people functions for ICSs and the development of a one workforce approach. So there was a coming together of minds and thinking, which helped us to really sort of set out this purpose and shared ambitions for ourselves. If you want to go on to the next slide, thanks. The other thing that I think was a driver was we'd done some work with the national team as part of the NHS Futures and OD report around looking at the makeup of our people services teams. And I think some of the information that came out of that was quite a surprise to people. So when we realised we'd actually got 481 people working across people services across our system, that feels like a big number. And I think we were all asking ourselves, do we feel as if we're getting the biggest return on that asset, which is a sizable asset? The other really interesting thing that came out of that, which was mirrored in the Futures report, was the difference between the amount of time and activity that is spent on transformational and or strategic HR and OD work compared to the much bigger amount of time that is on transactional work. And again, it felt as if there are some opportunities there for us to improve productivity and to shift that balance onto more transformational activities. So that was a driver for us as well. If you could move on to the next slide, thanks. So we started off with a day together. We had all the HR directors from across the organisations and their deputies, and spent some time agreeing some principles to guide our work, which you can see here. And I think these are really quite important for us. And what we do is to keep going back to these to say, actually, is the work that we're doing, is that helping us deliver this? And I think one of the key things for us was about doing things once and doing it well. And that sounds easy to say, but actually it's not. And I think it sort of resonated with me, what I was listening to from Southwest London, definitely. If you want to go on to the next slide. So we identified 7 programmes of work, which are listed here, which are probably all the things that you would imagine that people services functions are working on. We do have some track record of working collaboratively together. So we already have a single occupational health service and a system-wide collaborative wellbeing offer. We have one team that runs all the payroll for the NHS organisations. We have a team which is our kind of shop window, our joined up careers team, which is a shop window for recruiting people at sort of entry level into the organisations. And we do have a joint venture between 2 of the providers for their transactional services. And I was just reflecting when I was listening to the other colleagues and some people's questions, really interesting about what's the right model to do this. So we've got a multiplicity of different models just within those four areas. So the joint venture, that was done as a TUPE, and the view of a number of people who are involved in that is we wouldn't want to go down that road again, which I think is really interesting. I think that needs exploring, because I think it clearly can work, but I think in this situation there were reasons why it's perhaps felt that it wasn't the right thing to do. Whereas on some of the others, we work much more as a genuine collaborative where people have not moved organisations but work underneath a lead person who sits in one of the organisations. So yeah, really interesting to think about those different models. If you want to go on to the next slide. The other thing that we did do was, and this was with quite a bit of steerage from the provider collaborative leadership team, was to identify within those programmes there were 5 that we thought were really important for us to be working together on and to make some progress on during this year. So no surprises, one of them is around collaborative recruitment and resourcing. So really interesting to hear the Southwest London experience, and definitely a lot we can learn from others on that. We wanted to develop a common system induction programme that would sit over on the top of local organisational induction, but we felt it was important for us to have a better introduction to what it meant to be part of the ICS and the ICB. We've been doing work around mandatory training and trying to align that, and again that's one that we've had a go at a number of times over previous years, but I think the feeling was this is the opportunity to try and crack this now, and we are making good progress on that. We've started to do some work around aligning policies. So we've picked 3 or 4 policies to start with, where we're trying to look at aligning and having one policy across the system. And we've also further evolved the MOU that we had, and which most people had during COVID, to enable us to move people across the system. We're kind of taking that to a next level, so it's a bit more robust and it's more flexible and covers as many scenarios as we need it to. The other thing that we agreed at the outset was to utilise the system ePMO that we've got within Derbyshire, and we wanted to use that to make sure that we were capturing information, that all the work was visible to people, and to enable us to track progress easier. Because that's something that we have learned from previous how we've worked together, was that there was lots of good stuff happening, but not everybody knew about it. So we really wanted to make sure that we were capturing the work, both from a performance management point of view, so that we actually knew that things were moving, but also it makes it much easier for it to be shared with people across the system. The other thing we've done is we've got myself as a full-time dedicated programme director for the programme, and a project manager as well, which has been really helpful. So on to the next slide. What have we actually managed to do so far since we started last year in May? So at the moment it's actually 43 initiatives now. I had a quick look on the system yesterday, and we've got 43 initiatives that are on our ePMO, which feels really great. So they're sitting alongside, other big system programmes of work like planned care, urgent and emergency care, mental health. So it feels really good to have that people services collaborative sitting there alongside the rest of them. Some of the areas that we've done, we've established a temporary workforce communication hub to help us with our reservists and our temporary workforce, because that's an area of real focus for us. We have got a new system induction programme. We've got new leadership induction resources that everybody's signed up to and is implementing. We've also agreed a core leadership development offer, so we're going to have one offer across all the organisations, which would be accessible to anybody, using the definitions that the Leadership Academy use. So a common offer for emerging, aspiring, experienced and senior leaders. We're doing some work which actually predated the collaborative, but we've brought it into the collaborative because, again, it was something that was happening over here and not everybody knew about it. But we're doing some work with cultural intelligence and using that lens and that approach to review our recruitment practices across the system. So we're now at the stage of beginning to embed and roll out some of the learning from that, which has been really revelatory actually to a lot of people, and we're now training a group of facilitators collectively to embed that CQ approach across the system. And that was interesting because when that first was suggested, it was the default position was, well, we'll train people and then they can do a certain amount of days within their organisation. So I just posed the question, what about if we ask people to work across the system? And immediately it was, oh yeah, that would be much better. Let's do that. So that was a good moment. We've still working on the aligning mandatory training, but we have made progress. We've made more progress in this last year than we had probably in the last 5 years on it, and have now got to a point where we've got a verbal agreement to recognise each other's mandatory training. And we have commenced that policy alignment. We've got a menopause policy that is going to be across all the organisations, and we're also looking at a couple of others. And one that we do want to prioritise is one around reasonable adjustments. Okay, if you could move on, please, for me. I guess the other thing I was just going to say is our governance has developed. So when we started off last year, it was a bit, you can see the people and culture PMO was kind of sitting on its own and we weren't really quite sure where it fitted in, because I guess at this stage we were still developing the overall governance for the system. But we've now moved on to how it is on the next slide, which is with the People Services Collaborative having now established a delivery board of its own, which is on the next slide, if you could just move that on. So we're now very clearly sitting within the overall system governance, identified as one of the delivery and transformation groups for the system. I'm reporting in to the Provider Collaborative Leadership Board, which gives much more of a sense of ownership and commitment, which is really good. If you can move on to the next slide, thanks. So in terms of where we want to go next, we've got some outline plans that we discussed with the Provider Collaborative leadership team just a couple of weeks ago. And I think there's areas of the existing programme that we want to carry on with and to continue with. Plus, we've identified some areas that we really, again, are our kind of big ticket items for next year, which are around looking at our digital approach. And we're fortunate enough to have got some funding and support from NHS England to help us do this, and to develop a roadmap to the new replacement ESR system. And that's got a lot of benefits for us, actually, because we know across the system that our ESR utilisation is very variable, and there's an awful lot more we could be doing with it right now that would really help us, as well as get us in a better position for the changeover to the new ESR. We've agreed to do some work around domiciliary care, international recruitment, which is a big issue for our local government partners. So we're going to be leading and working with them on developing a collaborative approach to that. We want to accelerate our collaboration around recruitment. I think we're at the point with that now where we're going to be having some of those conversations that South West London have had to have about, actually, so how will we do it? What is the right model? And I think that's going to be a real focus for us for all the reasons that you outlined. And we're also going to be doing some further work around scaling up where we can for transactional efficiencies. So although we currently have a single payroll service, there's been no investment into the processes and the systems. They've just kind of carried on doing what they were doing before, just they sit together. So there's a massive opportunity to do that. So we were asked for one piece of learning. If you want to move on to the next slide, probably, oh, I don't know if you can see the rest of it. Oh, there we are. Yeah, you can. So I could have had lots, and I agreed with all the ones that South West London colleagues talked about. But the one I picked is this piece of advice from the School for Change Agents, which has always resonated with me really well, but particularly has resonated with me over the last year, which is when you're frustrated at others because you've made your best case for change and they just don't get it, perhaps what you need to do is look in the mirror and ask yourself instead, what is it that I'm not getting about them? And that has just resonated with me on a number of things where, you know, at first instance, it's the obvious thing to do. Why can't people see it? But there are so many, and as you talked about such you know so well, there are so many cultural, historical reasons why people may not want to do things. And before you can make a start on embarking on change, then you know you really have to understand that and probably take a step back and maybe reframe what it was you were thinking of doing. And I guess, you know, when I was preparing this and reflecting on it, it kind of brought it home to me that I guess I've really viewed this more as an OD initiative than maybe a provider collaborative initiative, which is probably more of my sort of background. But it feels to me that this will succeed or fail on the level of commitment that the partners have to doing this, their sense of common purpose, and their ability to have some challenging conversations between ourselves and back in the organisation. So it's been a helpful opportunity to think about that. So that's the end of my presentation. I did notice there was a few questions flashing up, but I can't see the questions at the moment, so I'll have another look. So happy to try and answer those or take any others, Isabel.
Thanks, Linda. That's really great. And I think that, yeah, that slide of advice could be relevant to lots of situations in life, couldn't it? I think there are a couple of questions, comments, interest around the cultural intelligence process and materials. So wondered if you could say a bit more about that perhaps, and why that was so important for you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, someone's just trying to call me on Teams. Yeah, so we're working with a company called Above Difference, who use this methodology called cultural intelligence, and it was started in one of our organisations actually, and they brought them in to do some work with their board and their team, and I can't quite remember how we got into it, but I think it was probably at about the time when everyone was really thinking about equality and inequality, and probably looking at some of our res data and reflecting on the fact that our disparity ratios were not very good across any of our organisations. And a few of us, I think, started to say, well, actually, we don't think the way we do recruitment is very good. It's not person-centred. It doesn't get the best out of people. And it almost feels like, you know, we're putting barriers up for people to get through, rather than realising that actually we don't have a monopoly over great people, and we need to make our organisations and our jobs and careers really attractive to people. So all those things kind of coincided, and when we started to think about using a cultural intelligence lens on recruitment, we just began to think we really need to change some of the things that we're doing. So where we're getting to is we're going to have one team who write job descriptions, because we looked at some of our job descriptions and they were just awful. You had no idea actually what the job was. They'd been written to meet agenda for change requirements, professional requirements, to the outside person looking at what is this job really about and what would I get from it. There was not a lot to go on. So we've changed the way we write job descriptions. We're going to change the way we interview, and yeah, it really was quite revelatory. I can share. We've got some quite nice materials on some of the stuff that came out of that work that I can share if people are interested.
Yeah, it seems there's quite a bit of interest in the chat on that, Linda, so that would be really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, please do use the raise hand function if you'd like to come in with a question. I'll just ask one in the meantime, if that's all right, Linda. So I was interested in how you talked about sort of staying rooted in some key principles, and thought that was really interesting. Just wondered how practically you went about that, sort of keeping that focus of mind for people.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably one of my jobs as programme director is to keep us coming back to why and what are our principles. But we do try and embed that across all the work that we do. So any of the work that we're doing we call them initiative owners, the people who work on the different priorities. We spent quite a lot of time with them. And really helping them to think about what is it they're doing, what do they want to get out of it. I don't know whether we're peculiar, but I think we're very good at describing what we want to do. We're not very good at describing what we expect the impact of that to be. So we've really tried to focus people, and actually using the project management approach has really helped us do that, to keep saying, so why, how does it fit with what we said we wanted to do? And how is what you're going to do actually going to have any impact on those principles? And if it doesn't fit, then should we be doing it? It might be something that people are interested in and want to do, but if it doesn't fit with with that sort of shared purpose, maybe we need to think again.
Yeah, I was interested as well in you referenced a couple of times sort of how you'd used looking at data in a bit more detailed way as a jumping off point to do something differently. And were there any other examples of data that sort of came through that surprised you and made you do something a bit different, or that made you approach something in a new way?
So, I mean, one of the ones was around mandatory training. I think we found out that one organisation had got 11 pieces of learning that they said were mandatory, and one had got 30. So there was a sort of, that's an obvious thing to think about. You know, yes, there's going to be some differences between organisations, but really that many. So there was that. I think there's some interesting on that earlier slide. There's some comparisons of numbers of the ratios of HR staff. So there were some quite differences between the providers, and then there's some quite interesting benchmarking information between how many the ratio of HR and OD staff to staff, and it's quite different compared to. So I think we've got an average, well, our range is between 1 to 52 members of staff to 1 to 73 members of staff, but the sort of global benchmark is 1 to 146 and 1 to 158. And then when you look at the benchmark cost, our cost is less than the typical benchmark. So I mean, that immediately gets you into thinking about, so they tend to have people at a higher level, they're probably more expert, they have less people doing transactional work. So all that stuff that South West London were talking about in terms of looking at the robotics approach and looking at greater digitalisation, that just totally backs up that's going to be an opportunity for efficiency.
Yeah, thank you. Just check if there are any other questions that people have. Just have a quick look through on screen, just see if anyone's waving at me. Can't see any other questions for today. So we might let people have a slightly earlier finish, because it's always good to get 5 minutes back in your day, isn't it? So I'll say just a big thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to Linda, and thank you to, I think Kelvin and other Linda have left us, but David's still there. Thank you, David. Really interesting reflections today. Quite a range of, I think, looking at sort of the big picture themes, but also really getting into the practical detail and helpful things that people can take away. I think a couple of things that struck me in terms of the South West London example. I thought it was really interesting, that sense of ownership that Kelvin referred to, and sort of talking about that local focus that's become so important, particularly since the pandemic. And encouraging to hear that, you know, despite having set some fairly ambitious targets quite early on, there's encouraging progress already. So that's, I'm sure, really motivating for all the team involved there. And really interested, Linda, in that recent example, you know, particularly how you made sure that sort of laser focus on coming back to the why are we doing it? What are we trying to achieve? I think that's so important. So lots of helpful stuff for people to take away. What we're going to do after the session is produce a case study briefing, which is based on the webinar. So there'll be a written write-up that you can refer back to. And we'll also include links to our previous case study briefings and recordings of the webinars in the email that comes round to you after the event. We'll also just do a quick scan of the chat just to check there's nothing else we've missed. And we're also in the process of finalising the next stage of our upcoming provider collaboration support programme. We'll of course share that with you, the full programme of events very soon. So do stay in touch with the programme, because as I'm sure you've seen today, there's lots and lots of helpful tips and advice from coming through. Please do also take a couple of minutes to complete the online evaluation form. That's always really helpful just for us in terms of how we run these events, anything we need to think about differently for next time. So I will leave it there, give you 5 minutes back in your day. One quick question. Jude's asking, will the slides be shared? So I'm going to ask Bobby about that, because I will check. I'm assuming so, but yeah, yes, they will be shared. Thank you very much. So I will let you go now, and thank you very much to everyone for joining today.